My name's Kirk Johnson. I'm the Sant Director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, and I'm also a paleontologist. I study what happened to the plants when the dinosaurs went extinct. And that's a great tale of an asteroid striking the Earth and causing a global catastrophe. Here at the Smithsonian, all sorts of paleontology has been happening for well over a century. In 1909, the fourth Secretary of the Smithsonian, Charles Doolittle Walcott, made an amazing discovery in British Columbia, the Burgess Shale, the first real evidence of the explosion of life that kicked off this incredible diversity of life we see on the planet today. And the U.S. Geological Survey has been housed here since its very beginning. We have over 40 million fossils in this collection. And those fossils tell an incredible story about life on this planet. This story, an introduction to paleontology, will talk about everything from dinosaurs to duck-billed platypuses, and ammonites, the tentacled squid-like relatives that ruled the seas during the Mesozoic. You'll see saber-toothed mammals like the Smilodon, the big saber-toothed cat of Los Angeles. And you'll see small stuff like little tiny microscopic forams, the plankton that fills the sea and creates the oxygen that we breathe. All of these things piece together the grand narrative that is the history of life on this planet. And there's implications not only for the past, but for the future. Your guide to this amazing trip is Stuart Sutherland. He's a great presenter, and he's going to do an excellent job in telling you how paleontology works and some pretty cool stories about life on this Earth. So sit back and enjoy the show.
How well do you know your local history? I mean, really know it. How far can you go? For example, consider this magnificent building, the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. The current building was open for business in 1910, but the Smithsonian Institution, of which it is a part, was founded in 1846 from a legacy provided by Englishman James Smithson, who, incidentally, had never visited the USA, nor had any relatives or contacts here. His reasons for leaving all this money to the people of the USA is, well, kind of hazy. The name for the city in which the Smithsonian is based was signed into law by its namesake, President George Washington. You can consider DC's origins, therefore, to go back to 1791, when Washington commissioned Monsieur Pierre l'Enfant to draw up plans for a new city on the northeast shore of the Potomac River. But we can take the history of DC back even further. We know European explorers were here by about the early 17th century, but by then the area was already inhabited by a number of Native American peoples, including the Nacotchtank, who lived in a village of the same name along the Anacostia River. Archaeological evidence indicates that Native Americans had settled this area by at least 4,000 years before the present era. This ancient history, though, is barely scratching the surface of the past of the area we now call Washington, D.C. There are creatures far more fierce and scary than the political animals of today lurking in this city's past. For example, there are certain sedimentary rocks around Washington, D.C., sandstones, conglomerates and mudstones that have a story to tell, a story that takes us back 110 million years, a story that involves a rather scary-looking tooth. These are the rocks that the fossils are found in, and as a geologist and paleontologist, I've been trained to kind of reverse engineer sedimentary rock sequences like this. We take clues from the type of sediments we find, structures they preserve, like ripple marks produced by an ancient river, or cracks left in mud when a pond dries out in the sun, and of course, any fossils those sediments contain. And from them, we can recreate lost environments and landscapes. The picture we get of DC back then, 110 million years ago, is of a swampy area, a bit like you see in this image of the Mississippi River Delta today. If you had hiked through the ancient landscape of DC, you'd have had to work your way across numerous meandering streams and rivers. There would have been ponds accumulating clays and silts, plant debris, and also fossils, like that tooth I mentioned. We also know that DC was close to the edge of a new ocean that had split the supercontinent of Pangaea from north to south. This was the young Atlantic Ocean, much narrower than it is today, of course, but widening with every year that passed. And if you were able to walk along the National Mall at 110 million years ago, this is the landscape and animals you would have seen. The forests would have been dominated by conifers and particular forms that are related to modern cypress trees. There was also a relative of the modern sequoia. We find fossils not only of its foliage, but some of its cones too. Although we have no body fossils yet, probably due to the delicate nature of their bodies, there are also likely frogs, early birds, insects, primitive mammals, and soaring overhead, majestic pterosaurs. And of course, there were dinosaurs. Some of them small and agile like little Dromaeosaurus, a bipedal carnivore about 1.5 meters long and relative to Velociraptor, one of those dinosaurs that were made famous in the Jurassic Park movie. And some giants too, the bones of Pleurocolus, a large sauropod plant-eating dinosaur, had been found with adults reaching up to around 9.1 meters high and around 15.2 to 18.2 meters long. We also find the remains of a yet unidentified terror of this ecosystem. Remember that tooth? The tooth and associated fragments of bone found in the sediments around DC belong to a large predatory dinosaur, probably similar to Acrocanthosaurus. As of yet, we don't have enough material to make a definite classification, but there was certainly something big and scary lurking near this swamp during the Cretaceous of DC. Now, we humans are a relatively new species, so this world of dinosaurs 110 million years ago feels unimaginably ancient. Paleoanthropologists estimate our species, Homo sapiens, to be about 200,000 years old. As such, we have a very limited perspective on what a changeable place our home planet is. This is the power and the wonder of paleontology and its subdiscipline, paleobiology. It provides us with an ability to paint pictures of ancient worlds, but much more than that. Fossils also help us address important questions. Questions like, how and when did large portions of the biosphere collapse? And how did some species manage to adapt to extremes in climate or cataclysmic natural disasters? Fossils provide insights into the pace of evolution over time and insights into how pervasive life can be. But they also serve as a warning that nothing lasts forever and that entire groups of creatures can disappear overnight in the blink of a geological eye. Fossils are vital words on the pages of Earth's history. And through this series, I will address some of those questions. Questions that the Department of Paleobiology at the National Museum of Natural History have been addressing for over 50 years. The museum is full of fossil clues to Earth's past, and aided by some of the collections and some of the cutting-edge research in the Department of Paleobiology, we can explore the history of life from Earth's earliest days through to more recent times in our planet's history. Paleontology is a broad church composed of various subdisciplines that draws on many other areas of science, including biochemistry, mathematics, engineering, and many others. But something I should note here. I've been referring to the Department of Paleobiology at the National Museum of Natural History and not the Department of Paleontology. Now, the difference might sound subtle, but it's an important one, as it underlines the fact that although research here is obviously paleontological in nature, the scientists within the department are engaged in much more than an exercise of classifying and cataloguing fossils. But don't get me wrong, as we shall see, the curation of fossil collections is a vital underpinning element of any museum or research department. The research carried out in the National Museum of Natural History, though, is quantitative and process-oriented. That approach that is essential if we are to fully understand ancient creatures and their ecology, and make valid and reasoned comparisons to to the biosphere today. In many of the episodes in this series, we will examine some of the exciting research that is currently being undertaken at the museum, research that is being used to open up windows into lost histories and lost ecosystems buried all around us. Just now, though, I'd be grateful if you would allow me to take you on just a little diversion. When my mom, or me mum, as you say if you come from the north of England, was born in Stockport, just south of Manchester, in 1927, the National Museum of Natural History had been open for just 17 years. It was brand new. This is a picture I have of my mum back in 1935. She'd been selected to be the May Queen that year and be told that May Queens don't grin, which explains the practiced scowl in this photograph. And this is my grandmother, Jane Murphy, taking tea with her friend in 1911. Her mother, my great-grandmother, was Sarah Hannah Eyre, and still further back you can trace my mum's family all the way back to the 14th century of Derbyshire, and perhaps even earlier, right back to the Norman invasion of Britain back in 1066. I know a lot of this from the stories my mum would tell us when we visited Derbyshire, and as a child, the length of time she was describing sounded absolutely incredible. Almost 1,000 years of history. And why am I taking you on this brief tour of my family history in a series about fossils and ancient life? Well, as human beings, we filter time through the lens of a human lifetime, which at present, depending on where you live, ranges from about 50 to 100 years. This is why, when considering the vast depths of Earth's time, just like our description of an ancient Washington, D.C., the enormous scale of geological time can be difficult to grasp. It is a vital concept for us to come to terms with, though, if we are to gain a proper understanding of the history of life on our planet. So, I'd like to place our human perception of the passage of time into the context of Earth's history. For that, we need to understand the concept of deep geological time. Now, this is not to be confused with depth in a physical miles or kilometres sense, but in a temporal sense of years and eons. The Earth is 4.54 billion years old, a fantastically long time when compared to the lifetime of a human. That is 4,540,000,000 years, or written out as numbers, 4,540,000,000 years. For me, that is just a big number with a lot of zeros. As such, in an attempt to wrap my head around the age of the Earth, I often fall back on analogy. A common tool is to condense all of Earth's history into one calendar year. On this scale, the Earth forms in the first second of January 1st. This is a time when our solar system was a crowded place full of a variety of rocky planets zipping around close to the sun, and just like a busy freeway at rush hour, there would have likely have been collisions, but on a colossal scale. Some of those encounters would add mass to growing young worlds, while others probably obliterated each other in cataclysmic events, the stuff of disaster movies. But let's move forward on our calendar to when we start to find the first abundant fossils, those that possess shells. On our calendar, that puts us around November 18th, fairly late in the year. And animals with 4 legs, tetrapods, don't stride onto land until about December 1st. Continue with this scale, the dinosaurs just went into extinction on Boxing Day, December 26, and Stonehenge was built just 30 seconds before midnight on December 31st. However, given that the National Museum of Natural History is located along the front yard of the United States, better known as the National Mall, I thought we might use that as our timeline. On that timeline, I'm going to place the origin of Earth at 4.54 billion years ago at the Washington Monument, with today represented by the Capitol building. Join me as I take a walk between these two iconic DC buildings, covering 4.54 billion years in just 2.87 kilometres, or 1.35 miles. On this scale, depending on your stride length, each step you take will be between 1 million to 2 million years. But let's start outside of our timeline, before the formation of Earth. This point is just 29 metres in front of the Washington Monument, making it around 4.6 billion years ago, 60 million years before Earth's day one. If you could transport yourself back in time, you would be in open space. No Earth, just a nebula of dust and gas. We have places at a similar stage in their evolution in our own galaxy today. This is the Orion Nebula, and it is in a place like this that our solar system was born. In the Orion Nebula, gas and dust are collapsing under gravity to form new stars and planets. Our solar system would grow in the same way, perhaps initiated by the gravitational nudge from the death of an old star when it went supernova. But let's move forward in time to the first day of planet Earth and the Washington Monument. For us, on our timescale, this is day one, with the formation of a rocky planetary body that will evolve over the next 4.54 billion years into the Earth we know today. The Earth was heated after it formed, a combination of kinetic energy released from impacts of the remaining debris in the solar system and from the concentration of radioactive elements in the young planet's interior. Washington, D.C. at this time would have been a magma ocean, just like the rest of the planet, and it would take time for the Earth to cool and for its first solid skin, the crust, to form. But let's keep on moving. If we go just a little over 19 metres from the Washington Monument, we come to a very significant event in our story, the formation of Earth's moon, probably the result of a cataclysmic collision with a Mars-sized object, sometimes called Theia, about 4.5 billion years ago. This would have serious consequences for the development of life on our planet, including tides, various lunar cycles, and day length. The moon has also helped stabilise the Earth's wobble, allowing for the relatively benign seasons we enjoy today. Some of the oldest evidence of Earth's solid crust comes from Australia in the form of fragments of an older rock contained in a younger rock. It's a rock that we call a conglomerate. Isotopic analysis of those fragments contained in that conglomerate, and specifically from crystals called zircons, indicate that the Earth had a solid crust at about 4.4 billion years. On our timeline, that places us just 67 metres away from the Washington Monument. So it appears that the Earth has a surface of sorts very early on in its history. In addition, isotopic analysis of those zircons using different ratios of various stable elemental isotopes hints at liquid water too. The presence of liquid water in these distant times opens up the possibility that life might have a much older history than we initially thought. But we have to move on. One of the oldest complete rocks we have on Earth is the Acasta gneiss from the Northwest Territories of Canada, dated to around 4 billion years. That would be way up here on 14th Street on our timeline. But I would like to jump forward to a troubled time in the early Earth's history. At 356 metres from the Washington Monument. On the north side of the National Mall is the National Museum of American History, and on the south, the United States Department of Agriculture. On our timeline, we are at 3.8 billion years ago. We have completed just a little over 16% of our walk, and at this point in history, Earth was getting a hammering. This would last about 300 million years and is called the Late Heavy Bombardment Period. This is the time that Earth and the rest of the inner solar system was in a meteor and comet shooting gallery. If life had evolved about 4 billion years ago, as I hinted at earlier, it probably would have had to survive deep in Earth's crust, as some have suggested that these early impact events may have in effect sterilised the Earth's surface. It is not till around 400 million years later, at 3.4 billion years ago, that we find our first fossils. On our timeline, we are at the eastern edge of the National Museum of American History. These precious fossil bacteria come from a fossilised beach in Australia. They are the first fossil evidence we have that our planet was alive, heralds of all the spectacular life that is to follow. By the time we walk past the National Museum of Natural History at 2.4 billion years, life would be enduring another crisis, a superglaciation called a snowball Earth event that would encase our planet in ice for millions of years, On our timeline, we have covered over 47% of our Earth's history. Associated with the end of the snowball event will be a rise in oxygen levels and the deposition of these beautiful rocks, banded iron formations, rich in iron oxides, effectively rust, demonstrating that our atmosphere was evolving. This change was caused by photosynthetic bacteria releasing oxygen as a waste product and in the process, changing our planet forever. Following this rise in oxygen, life on Earth would go through a series of significant events. About 2.1 billion years ago, 1,011 meters from the Capitol building, we see the emergence of eukaryotic life. Eukaryotes are essentially all life that is not a bacteria or a virus. This is also a stage of life represented by the Gunflint chert, a rock around 1.88 billion years old, found along the shores of Lake Superior. And on our timeline, it would be only 867 meters from the Capitol building. By 1.2 billion years ago, 578 meters from the Capitol building, we have evidence of the first multicellular life form, Bangiomorpha, probably a simple red algae. And by 720 million years ago, just 346 meters from the Capitol, the snowballs had returned and then end here at 650 million years ago, right in the middle of the Capitol reflecting pool. We have now completed over 85% of our walk through time. It would be true to say that through most of our walk through time, so far, life has not been exactly, well, inspiring. In fact, for the past 1,926 meters, around 88% of the National Mall walk, life has been mostly microbial slime. But following that last snowball, things start to get interesting. Larger creatures emerge at 541 million years, just in front of the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial, and with them, evolution kicks into overdrive. We can see that world just after that explosion of life, here at 505 million years. This is the time of deposition of the Burgess Shale, a rock unit from Western Canada that was discovered in 1909 by Charles Walcott, former secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. The fossils preserved in the Burgess Shale provide a unique window into the explosion of complex life like this trilobite Olonides, but also a unique set of weird and wonderful creatures that evolved rapidly into the Cambrian oceans. DC would have looked very different during this explosion of life. In Rock Creek Park, about 8.5 kilometers north of the National Mall, we find sediments deposited at about this time. They tell us that DC was then on the edge of a deep ocean called Iapetus, next to the continent of Laurentia. But now, hold on to your hats, as things are going to change fast as DC witnesses a series of tectonic pileups. The first one occurs here by 1st Street Southwest at 460 million years ago on our timeline, with just about 10% of our timeline remaining. A series of volcanic islands that existed in that ocean into which the Rock Creek Park sediments were deposited would collide with North America. This raised up the ocean floor and started the building of mountains in the north-south direction on the eastern continental edge of this ancestral North American paleocontinent. But this was just the beginning. Around 100 million years later, microcontinents that include parts of what is now Western Europe would slam into this part of the world, raising the mountains even higher and causing magmas to be intruded into the deformed rocks. And then, at 320 million years ago, bam! Africa collides with this growing continental landmass. This is moving us towards the formation of a supercontinent called Pangaea, and in the process raises the mountains even further. The remnants of those mountains are the Appalachians, as high as the Alps or the Himalayas when they were young. After this collision, and just 32.8 meters closer to the Capitol building in DC, all around the world, life goes into crisis at 252 million years ago. Life on Earth would be laid to waste, with over 90% of species going into extinction, the greatest of the big 5 mass extinctions our planet has faced. This is a time of runaway global warming, probably triggered by titanic volcanic activity centered in what is today Siberia. global warming that may have also led to the production of toxic hydrogen sulfide in the Earth's oceans and the release of even more greenhouse gases as methane stored in the ocean sediments destabilised and was escaped to the atmosphere. It is the erosion of the mountains that formed due to the continental collisions we described back there that give us the next rocks we find in DC. And on our timeline, we have reached the foot of the Capitol building. This is where those dinosaurs we mentioned earlier, dating to 110 million years ago during the Cretaceous period, fit into our timeline. From this point, the dinosaurs would have another 44.5 million years to rule the planet. But then, here on our timeline, on the steps of the Capitol building, about 66 million years ago, around 2,300 kilometers to the southwest of DC, a 10-kilometer object comes screaming into the atmosphere and slams into the Yucatan, ending the reign of those magnificent beasts. DC would witness an impact from space much closer to home, 35 million years ago. An object smashed into North America just 200 kilometers to the southeast of DC in what is now Chesapeake Bay, and this with just 0.7% of our timeline remaining. Although not as large an impact as the dinosaur exterminating event 31 million years earlier, it would still have been a spectacular and disturbing sight. The 40-kilometer crater formed a depression that diverted the course of rivers and still causes sinking of the land in this area as the material in the crater continues to settle. As you can see, we are now really starting to run out of space on our timeline. So I'm going to employ a vital piece of scientific instrumentation to help us. This ruler. We think our species, Homo sapiens, evolved around 200,000 years ago. On our timeline, that places us just over this circular fountain and just under 10 centimetres from the front of the Capitol building. The maximum advance of ice in the last glacial period of the current ice age was about 22,000 years ago, and that's just about 1 centimetre from the end of our timescale. Although ice did not reach DC, it had a dramatic effect on the Washington area by lowering sea levels and the production of outwash plains. It diverted rivers and streams and had major effects on vegetation and climate. The date of arrival and origins of the first people in North America is somewhat in flux at the moment. But an early North American culture, known for their stone tools, called the Clovis culture, is generally agreed to be found at around 13,000 years ago, just over half a centimetre on our scale. 0.1 centimetres later, the last glacial period in the current ice age ends, and around 0.3 centimetres before the end of our timeline, at 6,000 years ago, many miles away from DC, we have evidence of the founding of one of Earth's first cities, Uruk, in what is now modern-day Iraq. The transition from BC to AD at 2016 years ago is 0.097 centimetres and just too small to be shown even on our ruler scale. So here, in this last 0.3 centimetres of our ruler is effectively all of what you could call recorded human history. Everything that we consider ancient on a human timescale is dwarfed by the immensity of the age of the Earth. This reminds me of something that Carl Sagan, a childhood hero of mine, did back in 1990. Carl was one of the team of scientists involved with the Voyager spacecraft missions, exploring the outer solar system. In 1990, when Voyager 1 was heading out of the solar system, he had the spacecraft turn to face the Earth and take this picture of the pale blue dot. He asked us to picture this dot and appreciate that everyone who ever lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. In the same way, we can look at our timeline and consider that, as Carl put it, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there in the final few millimetres at the end of the National Mall. So take a look again at the specimens we looked at earlier. The Acasta gneiss, some of the earliest Earth-born material that exists on the planet today. Over 4 billion years old and 1,927 metres away from the end of our timeline, our today. The trilobite Olonides, a creature that lived in the echoes of life's big explosion, 243 metres away, just in front of the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial, and a tooth from a DC long since vanished, barely the distance of an Olympic swimming pool away from the Capitol building. And once again, all of our own history squeezed into the end of our 12-inch ruler. All fossil creatures and the vanished worlds they lived in help us understand our place, not just in space, but also in time. They can also act as a vital benchmark for our appreciation of the Earth as it is today, its health, diversity, and perhaps provide clues to its future in a world that is always on the move and ever changing, no matter what our perception of time may tell us. To put it another way, fossils help us reassess the phrase as unchanging as the mountains. To a paleontologist, mountains are here today, gone tomorrow. Of all the wonderful museums at the Smithsonian, it is the National Museum of Natural History in particular that speaks to this deep geological time. In this series, we will visit some of the players in Earth's story that are featured in the collections and in the research at the museum. We will examine how the scientists in the Department of Paleobiology have helped piece together Earth's ancient story. It's going to be an interesting walk. But before we start on our hike through the ancient worlds represented by Earth's deep history, we should consider the raw materials of the science of paleontology, the fossils themselves. In our next episode, let's get up close and personal with fossils.